Hello and welcome to NCCP On Demand. We are in the middle of a series called Sharing Life, looking at the biblical method of evangelism. I'm Pastor John, and I'm with North Carroll Cooperative Parish of the United Methodist Church, otherwise known as NCCP, and we welcome you. This is the second in this series. Last week we looked at getting our hearts right in terms of being prepared to share the gospel story to others. In many cases today, unfortunately, Christians come across as being just so angry and mad and looking for opportunities to destroy opponents. And we looked at that as an unhealthy starting point in terms of evangelism. And so in our adventure here, we looked at another way, and we said we need to get our hearts right. In order to get our hearts right, we need to have our hearts break for the things that break God's hearts. And so we established that. I encourage you to check that video out, part 1 of Sharing Life, if you missed it. But this week, I'm going to take the next step in our adventure, and I'm going to do 3 things. I'm going to tell you what evangelism is not. I'm going to give you a biblical view. And then I'm going to give you a small example of how to begin your own adventure after our hearts are right. And so with that, I'd just like to start off by saying, before we moved here, we lived in a development that was very attractive to salespeople. And so it seemed like every Saturday morning, and our day to sleep in, or to at least to just get off to a slow start, the doorbell would ring. And sure enough, it wouldn't be one of our neighbors or a friend. It'd be a salesman. And they'd be trying to sell us a new roof, or new windows, or new doors, new garage doors, a security system, new siding, whatever the case may be. And after a while, I'm thinking, man, we must really live in a dump, because these salespeople try to sell us something every day, or at least every week. And but the point is how annoying that became over time. And there was nothing worse than to being distracted or interrupted by a cold call in terms of a salesperson. And they would, if you let them in, but even before that, they were so good at pressuring you. And they would pressure you in a number of ways. But one of their techniques was the technique of FUD. Creating fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And a good salesperson could make you feel like if you didn't buy their product, or at least let them do an assessment, that terrible things were going to happen to your house or to your family. And so that's the idea that we have of salespeople in terms of cold calls or even telemarketers. They operate the same way, really pressure and really trying to create that fear that only they can solve. And so thinking of sales in that way, in that negative light, we know that not all sales are like that, but thinking of it negatively, the problem with that is when we deal with evangelism in the same way. In many cases and many times, as someone attempting to share our faith, we sometimes come across as that cold call salesman. As if we're just ringing the doorbell, maybe even literally, and entering somebody's home that we don't know at all, pressuring them into a relationship with Christ, or pressuring them into at least hearing the gospel story, creating fear, uncertainty, and doubt through our pessimistic view of the world and the elevation of the judgment part of the scriptures. And we do such a good job of that sometimes. The problem with that is that just like a cold call for selling you a new roof, people don't like that. That turns off a large majority of the population. Nobody likes a sales approach to evangelism, or very few people like a sales approach to evangelism, because it just makes them feel pressured. And nowhere in our scriptures do we find pressure as a technique for sharing God's love and grace. The other thing is that if evangelism was sales, it would leave most of us out, because it takes a very gifted and talented person and with some natural ability and trained to be able to be a good salesperson. Not everybody can sell a house. Not everybody can sell furniture. Not everybody can sell a car. And not everybody can do cold calls. It's a very select group of people that can do that and do it well. And so if we had to be a salesperson at heart to share the faith, then we would be really in bad shape. The second thing, again, the problem with that, if you think of evangelism as sales, is simply what we've already mentioned. People don't like to be sold products. And so the good news is evangelism is not selling Jesus. So it's not. So that's the first point, is evangelism is not selling Jesus. And which is great news for us. This is great news for us. It is not about getting people pressured to buy. Jesus is not a product. All right, and so if evangelism is not sales, then what is it? And so let's look at the biblical view. And one of the places we can start is our oldest text from the New Testament, 1 Thessalonians. If you look at 1 Thessalonians, it's the letter Paul is writing to this group of people that he loves and a church that he founded. In the second chapter, we get some real good clues on how he brought them to the point where they could meet Christ. And we'll get some clues about evangelism. So I encourage you to read chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. But I'm just going to highlight a couple words and a verse here for our purposes. First of all, just again, if evangelism, hopefully you haven't turned the video off already because you think so badly of evangelism, or you just think there's no way I could ever do this. Well, first of all, Paul had to pray for courage as well. Remember last week we talked about Paul praying through his heart change. His heart was broken for his family and people that didn't know Christ. Well, this week we see that he's prayed for courage as well. And so if you're like me and you need courage to go out and share the gospel, then know that we're in good company because Paul did the same. The next clue the first clue that we get about evangelism not being sales is Paul, starting in verse 3, it's really verse 3, 4, and 5. He uses phrases like, we didn't use deception. We didn't use flattery. In other words, they weren't trying to trick people or pressure people into believing in Christ. They weren't just trying to get people to make decisions, bottom line, sales. They weren't selling a product. No deception, no flattery. And so that's an important part of this passage for us to look at in depth in your reading. The verse that I want to lift up is verse 8. Or first of all, verse 7, verse 7 and 8. Part of verse 7 says, we were gentle with you like a nursing mother caring for our own children. So Paul, not only did he not try to deceive people or sell people, he was gentle. So Paul wasn't trying to destroy anyone. He didn't post a Facebook message of hate and judgment against people. He was very gentle, like a mother and a nursing child is the imagery he uses. We were like infants. Very gentle approach. And the reason he did that was because he didn't know these people. So he didn't come into town with his guns blazing. He was very gentle. And this bleeds into verse 8. He says, we were glad to share not only the gospel with you, but our very lives. And this is, verse 8 really gets to the core of what evangelism is. If it's not sales, what is it? It's sharing life. Sharing your whole life with folks. Sharing my whole life with folks in a natural, non-deceptive, non-flattery way in terms of trying to trick somebody. Just sharing life. And so that's what Paul did with these people. He was side by side with them in the community. He spent more time in Thessalonica than he did anywhere else. He worked side by side. He went to the marketplace. He told stories. He shared stories. He found out about their families. And he tried to build friendships with these folks. And genuine friendships. They weren't sales prospects. They weren't projects. They were just people he was trying to get to know. Looking for an opportunity where the Holy Spirit might nudge him gently to introduce them to Christ. And that's really what evangelism is then in a nutshell there, that verse 8. Evangelism is sharing life in two ways. Verse 8 has both of them here. life with a capital L, meaning the gospel, and life, or through life with a little l, which is sharing our life experiences with one another. And Paul laid that out for us nicely. I encourage you to look it over very carefully because it gives us a great foundation for biblical evangelism. Sharing life, capital L, little l. And again, we're thankful for Pete Briscoe, Pastor Pete Briscoe in Texas, who really coined that phrase, sharing life with the capital L, little l. I mean, he put a name to what so many of us, including you, already do, and gives us a picture of a non-sales approach of evangelism. So we're thankful for Pastor Pete and his work with evangelism there. So, if evangelism is not sales, now we have a biblical picture of what evangelism is or what it should look like. It should look like building relationships through sharing life, looking for opportunities to share life with a capital L. Now we move into, I'll give you a little example, a little personal example of what that could look like for you and what it looks like for me. But first of all, the great news is we have plenty of opportunity. And so I'm going to give us a two-sided statement here, so carefully, so we don't lose sight of this. Number one, most of the people out in our community, we live in a wonderful community. And if you're watching worldwide, I'm not sure about your community, but our community here in northern Baltimore and northern Carroll County, beautiful people, wonderful opportunity to share good life with folks. But, however, no matter whether you live here or in West Virginia, California, England, wherever you're watching this from, most people out there do not have a close relationship with God through Christ. Most people are not active in a church. Most people either never have known Jesus or don't know Jesus anymore or whatever, choose not to follow Jesus, whatever the case might be. And so the harvest is plentiful, and as the scriptures tell us, and that is true today as it has been for many years. So that's the good news, though. Now, let's not get mad about that. Our hearts should break about that, but let's not get mad. And there's lots of beautiful people out there that we can become friends with nonetheless. So anyway, with that being said, though, a personal note, and I encourage you to adopt this if you can see it as working for you. When I'm out in the community, at the store, at a ball game, at a gas station, banking, whatever it might be, I start with the assumption that the person that I'm meeting for the first time, or second or third, already knows Jesus, already has a relationship with Christ. Even though statistically I'm probably wrong, I start there with that assumption that they know Christ. And in fact, I can take it a step further. I assume that they're already going to church somewhere else. And so I don't bust into this relationship, meet the person for the first time, and automatically assume that they're condemned. I don't ask them where they're going to go if they die today. I don't start there. I don't automatically assume they're not going to a good church. I know they're not going to a great church because they're not coming to our church. That's a joke. But I automatically assume all those things in order that we can start a relationship from scratch, a foundation, in order that I can't look at them. If I start with that assumption, I'm not looking at them as a project or a prospect or a potential sale. I'm not thinking about closing a deal to get them in the pews on Sunday mornings. None of that. I'm just trying to make a new friend. And that might sound silly or corny, but it's the God's honest truth. And it's a great place to start in terms of relationship. And just like Paul, I go gently. I don't try to, even if I hear things that aren't so good in terms of where I think they might be after I get to know them, I'm still very gentle and patient, and I go at God's pace, which we're going to talk about more next week in detail about what to do next. But anyway, that assumption for me is very important. And I'm trying to make a friend regardless of whether they whether they already know Christ, which I'm assuming they do. But even if I find out that they don't, and even if they don't respond to any of my conversation about faith, I still want them to be a friend. It's a genuine search for new friends in the community, mutual friendships. And so that's a very important part for me, and I encourage you to try to prayerfully adopt that model for yourself. And it makes it quite an adventure. Remember, this is not a process, it's not a project, it's not a package, a sales technique package. It's an adventure. Evangelism is an adventure. Sharing life with a little L is things that we already do, and it might just open an opportunity to share life with a capital L, as Pete Briscoe would say. I've had plenty of opportunity. I enjoy being out in the community, again, especially here, of going to stores and banks, post office, ball games, all the park for the playground, all sorts of opportunities to meet new people. And I build gently and slowly and patiently relationships with folks because I want to get to know as many people as I can in this community. And then every once in a while, over time, even if it's 2 years later in this case, just one day out of the blue, for example, someone will say, "Hey, I have this little girl that's never been baptized," or "this little boy that's never been baptized. And I know you're a pastor. Can we talk about that?" And wow, what an opportunity that I didn't force, that I didn't try to destroy this person. I heard clues that they might not be involved in a relationship with God, but I just took my time until they brought it up. And it's just a wonderful way. And then then you have a green light and you have an opportunity to talk about the gospel, again, gently though, as Paul said, and invite them. Because the bottom line is that evangelism is not about getting them to make a decision for Christ. Although that's important, but that's not the sole importance. That's not our job. My job doesn't rise and fall based on getting 3 people this week to say yes to Christ or to say the sinner's prayer. That's not my job. My job this week is to look for opportunities and to hear the Spirit call me to introduce people to Jesus. And then whether they make decisions or not, personal decisions, that's between them and God. And I certainly can help guide them and have conversations that hopefully will lead them to that, but that's not my job. That's not what evangelism is. Evangelism is not putting a check mark on the wall. It's introducing people to Christ. But it starts with part 1's lecture last week was having the right heart, and then this week just sharing life as Paul did, taking our time and sharing life. Next week, again, it's not a process, but next week, part 3, it makes it sound like a process, even though it's not. Next week, we'll look in detail in terms of, what happens next? You're sharing life for a couple months, a couple years, 20 years. What do I do with that? That's great. That's not bringing this person to Christ, so what do I do next? And we're going to talk just about that next week, and I can't wait to share that with you. So in the meantime, thanks for visiting NCCP. For information about our church, be sure to check out our website. And if you are in this local area, North Baltimore County, North Carroll County, then visit us at any of our locations on Sunday morning. We'd love to see you. Until then, share life with folks, and may God be with you in everything that you do. Amen.